He had promised himself he'd be home for dinner. The jet landed early, the driver nodded. He climbed the marble steps of a house he owned 3 times over. The house smelled like lemon polish and childhood and also like a life he knew only between meetings and flights. Tonight he would step back into it. He pushed open the nursery door without announcing himself. Light hit a crib, a tower of stuffed animals, and then 2 small figures on the rug. One was his son, hair still damp, chubby hands and searching eyes. The other was the maid's daughter, a girl he'd watched grow from toddler to almost woman, kneeling with a battered picture book open. She hummed a low melody he didn't know and made the animals speak in soft, patient voices. His son answered in small sounds, more than he'd heard in months. He had expected a nanny with a tablet, not a scene like this. He halted in the doorway, breath shallow, the floor suddenly unfamiliar beneath his polished shoes. The man who owned skyscrapers could not move. A simple human sight held him frozen. The maid, Rosa, had been with them for years. Her daughter Lila had grown up in the house, folding laundry, watering orchids, learning to be quiet in rooms meant for someone else. No one had thought Lila would be the one to teach his son how to trust again. Noah had been 3 when the accident happened. A frantic moment, a hospital wait, and then months of silence. They tried therapists and specialists and medications that tasted of bureaucracy. His wife filled the waiting rooms and then left when the house pulsed with a life she could not accept. Jonathan returned to flights and numbers. The house filled with appointments. The child retreated. Tonight, fear softened under a girl's voice and a child's laughter. Lila pointed at a picture and coaxed the animal's sounds. Noah made a small quack, then a tiny bark. Each sound was a small earthquake. "He's been quieter lately," Rosa had said that afternoon, like a house report. She had not understood that silence can be a kind of scream. Lila closed the book on a son with a face. "You remember the son, Noah?" she murmured. He tapped the paper and, like a pebble dropped in glass, a tiny syllable rose. "Dad," he said. The word hung between them. Somewhere a clock chimed and the sound rolled away. Jonathan felt the floor tilt. He remembered Noah's first cry in a hospital bassinet and the naive certainty that being able to buy the world meant never having to be helpless. That promise felt thin now. Money moved mountains but couldn't move the human heart. He closed the door softly and sat on an ottoman, shoes off, feeling ridiculous and relieved. Lila bent her head toward Noah, her hair falling like a curtain shielding the small miracle. "Do you want Daddy to read the next page?" she asked, and Noah nodded. Jonathan took the book as if it were a responsibility. His voice was rusty but found a rhythm. He mispronounced hippopotamus and made funny faces. Both children laughed as if laughter itself had been waiting. When Noah said, "You're back," later, the words had no accusation, only relief. He had been away so much that his son's idea of him had narrowed to empty chairs and a name on a phone. Now, in lamplight and picture book pages, he was learning what presence meant. Lila explained she started helping because Noah had smiled at her the first week he came home and didn't look away. "I wanted him to know what to do with that," she said. Her answer lodged in him. He thought of appointments, clinics, specialists who spoke clinically and offered solutions like recipes. Lila offered something informal and radical. Mistakes made on purpose, silliness as therapy, patience as curriculum. That night he wandered the house, passing doors he had not opened in months. He saw a faded drawing stuck to a refrigerator door at Rosa's small apartment at the back, a sun drawn by a child's shaky marker. He sat on the stoop and called Rosa. "Thank you," he said simply. Her voice was soft with a lifetime of small tasks and heavier still with the gratitude he felt but had not yet known how to express. The next morning he started small. He sat through a therapy session and listened more than he spoke. He took notes with an awkward petered enthusiasm that made Lila laugh. They taught him to shape sounds with his lips, how to exaggerate consonants and make a game of vowels. He learned to praise tiny victories without turning them into check boxes. In the weeks that followed, he rearranged his calendar with the clumsy sincerity of a man learning to place one thing above another. He learned to make pancakes with sticky syrup fingers and to braid hair in a way that left Lila amused and Noah delighted. He learned the scent of the child's shampoo and the pattern of his favorite blanket. He put his phone down during meals. There were setbacks. Some mornings Noah retreated into thick quiet and refused to leave his crib. There were appointments that lost momentum. There were nights when Jonathan sat in an empty office pretending he was still working because being home felt like trespass. There were arguments with assistants who could not understand why quarterly earnings could wait for a doctor's appointment. Lila never made a scene about it. She was practical and patient. Once, when he arrived late to a session, she met him in the hallway with a small papier-mâché sun and handed it to him with paint-streaked palms. He painted it, she said. He wanted you to see. He almost cried in the marble corridor. Slowly, small things stacked into different shapes of possibility. Noah began bringing him toys, pressing a plastic dinosaur into the palm of a man who had forgotten that small hands could choose gifts without a ledger. Noah learned to count to 10 in a sing-song voice. One afternoon Noah climbed into his lap without hesitation and traced a vein on his wrist with a finger, the kind of casual inspection that seemed like a marriage proposal to presents. The city noticed. Neighbors saw the man who once took private elevators now crouching on stoops to tie laces or carrying a child's backpack. Some columnists wrote about a billionaire rediscovering family, and the photographs that ran with the stories tried to compress months into a single staged smile. He learned to ignore the glare and prefer authenticity. There were tensions. His estranged wife chose another life, a decision he sometimes thought he understood but other times blamed on himself. She came for brief visits at first, polite and precise, and then less often. Rosa kept the house steady with the quiet competence of someone who had held families together with a broom and a bowl. Lila carved out a place between staff and family, refusing titles as if the most honest designations were the ones acted out. One evening, months after that first night, they held a small party. It was nothing elaborate. A few close friends, a picnic on the lawn, Noah insisting the plates be dinosaurs. Lila arrived with paint on her thumb and a crooked cake she'd insisted on making. She had learned to keep the house in order and to stitch clothes and to make mugs from clay at the community center, a life built from careful hands. The guests watched as Noah ate cake messily and then pointed to Jonathan and said clearly, "Dad. A man can lose track of what matters when the world gives him numbers to chase. He can start to believe obligations are represented in graphs and that affection has a return on investment." The work of parenting, he learned, had no ROI columns. It was persistence and repetition. It was showing up even when the world demanded the opposite. When the magazine came with its glossy demands and a photographer's call, he thought about how to present himself. They wanted the usual hero shot, the signature jacket, the symbol of success. He asked for a different frame instead. A candid shot on the rug, the little boy asleep with his head on Lila's knee, paint on her fingers, a man in an untucked shirt holding the book he had learned to read from. The photograph that ran later was awkward and honest. It showed three imperfect people learning to be whole. The caption mentioned a billionaire who came home, but the picture said more. Home is work, love is practice, and small voices can break through great walls. He began to notice details he'd ignored. The way Lila's hands were always busy, how her laughter came quietly even when she was proud. She had once told Rosa she wanted to study speech at the community college but had to work, taking evening classes when the house slept. She practiced puppet voices with neighborhood children to buy a textbook. These small labors, unpaid and uncelebrated, had been the stitches holding their days together. He started to rearrange priorities more deliberately. He attended therapy sessions to learn, not to delegate. He helped with baths and bedtime, relearning the rhythm of small rituals. He even started a modest program at the community center with Rosa and Lila, teaching parents how to turn song into speech. He funded it quietly and then showed up, sometimes sitting at the back and listening as a neighbor described another small triumph. There were evenings he still wrote in a notebook he kept under a stack of press releases, not public statements but private promises. On one page he wrote, "Show up." On another, "Be clumsy, be consistent." He practiced patience like a craft. His estranged wife visited once and listened to Noah say his name clearly. She left afterward with a gentle, final resolve. He felt a grief that wasn't dramatic but steady like a low tide. He accepted it. Acceptance, he learned, could be its own kind of peace. One morning a crayon drawing arrived in the mail. It showed a crooked house and three stick figures holding hands. In uneven letters Noah had written, "Dad, Lila, Noah." He laughed until tears blurred his vision. The drawing fit into his palm like a key. Freezing at that doorway had been a strange mercy. It made him stop long enough to see what mattered. The billionaire had discovered that the richest thing he could own was presence. It cost him nothing of his fortune and everything of his previous habits. Standing still had, unexpectedly, been the first step home.